There we go. And I'm not muted anymore. And now we're finally on the way here. So the long story short of it is that, of course, we're here with Brad Trost in a few minutes. He's going to be joining us this morning, and I'm very thankful for him being here. But we'll talk to him in a minute because he's going to be here to talk about his return, his glorious return. He's trying to take the nomination for, let me get this right, Moose Jaw Lake Center, Lanigan. So again, good morning and welcome to Mountain Standard Time. I'm your host, Nathan Gita. Today, I'll be speaking with the Conservative nomination hopeful Brad Trost, of course, former leadership contender for the Conservative Party of Canada. And all of that's going to take place starting at around 9:30 Pacific, 10:30 Mountain. Be sure to like us on Facebook and support the Western Standard with an online subscription. But in the meantime, just before we get there, I want to come back to the Kamloops residential school question that's been going on in British Columbia and throughout Canada for about 2 weeks now. And there's been a lot of back and forth on this question. Obviously, the politically correct have made a lot of hay out of it, and they've kind of gotten as far down that line as they wanted to. But recently in my own hometown, there was an article in the local paper that was, again, discussing the history and legacy of O'Grady, Bishop O'Grady, who, of course, at one point was the principal of the residential school in Kamloops and then became both the bishop and the primary mover and shaker in Prince George Diocese, which runs all the way from the Yukon border, the Alberta border, and the Pacific Ocean, the cross line being just north of Quesnel. So about half of the province was under his jurisdiction when it came to their souls. And the short version of it is that the Kamloops residential school issue continues to provide fuel for the fires of politically correct wokies here in my hometown. Most recently, the column expressing positive thoughts about the beloved Bishop O'Grady to these points, whose name is on the high school here in Prince George, BC, has raised the ire of many people as well as the support of others. Facebook's actually aflame in comments. It's gotten pretty nasty out there. People calling each other racist, people calling each other various swear words. It's gotten pretty significant. So I never met Bishop O'Grady, but I have spent an inordinate amount of time with people who did, and many of them, almost all of them, to a man, loved Bishop O'Grady very much for his leadership as well as his spirituality. And I'm not saying that he wasn't a sinner. We're all sinners. But the genocidal genius that he's getting pictured as nowadays doesn't seem to be very accurate. If there is a valid criticism of Bishop O'Grady, I mentioned it here in my opening statement, is that he was actually quite a wily man. Supposedly, from some of the information I've gathered from people who knew him, he was just very good. He was very good at getting, whatever money was being given to a certain quarter into a direction that would assist the church. I wouldn't call it malfeasance, but I think perhaps the simplest way to say it is that just like how nowadays we all know people that are in the nonprofit industry and that sort of thing who have very, very close ties with the kind of state agencies that they deal with all the time. If you're some kind of fundraiser person for cancer, you are in deep with the board of directors of your local hospital. And the money that they're given on a whole bunch of other accounts somehow, some ways always ends up going towards you, or at least assisting you. Shared office space, shared computers. They upgrade their equipment. All of a sudden, you get their old equipment. This is an arrangement that's been around for a long time in Canada, actually going all the way back to some of our war materials. We didn't have the money to pay for good war materials. We still don't, apparently. So we take everybody else's, used stuff when they upgrade. And so I think that Bishop O'Grady, in that same spirit of taking someone else's used items that still have some life in them and having them for yourself while they go upgrade something else, or making sure that they renovate something that you'll also have access to, that appears to be the thing that he was able to do. And that was able to help bolster church missions and school initiatives in their traditional territory of the First Nations where he did this. So in other words, he put his thumb on the scale a bit and he got some excellent results. Nobody else could have done it. I think it was down to his personality. I think it was down to just kind of a foresight that he had, but also because he was able to work with the First Nations to get this done and with local authorities to get this done. This wasn't something that he just did by himself. He wasn't a self-willed strongman. He was just a networker, and he knew how to get things put together. So there'll always be valid criticisms of Roman Catholicism, which is my faith, and those are my leaders. And where there was abuse, those actors need to be rooted out and punished. I've said that very clearly before, and I'll say it again. And quite frankly, I mean, at one point when I thought I was discerning the priesthood for myself, I bet you something that that kind of gave everybody a red flag was when asked if I was ever made bishop, if I was ever made the leader of the episcopate of any diocese, what would I say? What would I do? If I was found, if I had to deal with abuse and with sexual abuse in my diocese, I said, well, I mean, I'd wait for a jury of their peers to have indicted them and to have found them guilty. But I'm a big fan of capital punishment, and I don't really care that that's not valid anymore in this country. So I would ensure that justice was done. And I remember people being kind of shocked at that statement, but I just kind of looked at them and I said, look, like if the church won't take care of its own, I don't know what else. I don't know how anyone could respect us. So I mean, that's always going to be a valid criticism of my faith. But when it comes to Bishop O'Grady, he was simply a man of his times, using the tools at his disposal, particularly to benefit those he believed he was entrusted with. That is true, particularly when we're talking about this most recent criticism, or this point that I'm trying to make about him putting his thumb on the scale. So when we acquit ourselves from this stage that we call life, can we say anything better of ourselves? And so I'll leave that there for our opening statement. Craig making the point that there was no sound at the beginning of this broadcast, and that's on me because I had failed to unmute my microphone. So that's kind of where I'm going to start. We're going to share a screen. We're going to go over to our Chrome tab here, and we are going to grab the citizens point here. So this is again my old stomping grounds. This was the I mean, maybe it's not fair to do color commentary on something that you're actually using from somewhere else. This is not the citizen that I grew up with. It's a little ad heavy. It's a little things of media in Canada is in a bad way right now, and it's rough. And you can see that obviously we need to make money where we can, I guess, when it comes to media in Canada. And it's a little bit of a sting. So, and before we get Brad on, we'll be sure to do our endorsement of Resistance Coffee, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But let's go through this a little bit when it comes to O'Grady's legacy. So, after bodies and unmarked graves were discovered at Kamloops Residential School, I was really surprised at the reaction of some people against Bishop O'Grady's. This was all written by Diane Fuller. She's a local advocate, local business person, somebody whose opinion that people value here in the northern capital of British Columbia. So after bodies were discovered, who loved the Indigenous so much. Up until he died in 1998, the Indigenous people seemed to love him as well. There were at least 2 busloads of Indigenous people from reserves across the diocese at his funeral, which was held in Prince George Civic Center because of the great number of people who wanted to attend. Bishop O'Grady told me that these people would call him at all hours to talk to him, even in the middle of the night, and he would always listen to them. They loved to pay him impromptu visits. I've heard also colloquially that the current bishop, who's the first non-oblate bishop, right? Because this was an oblate diocese, the Oblates of Mary Immaculate. This is our first non-oblate bishop, and that's not a problem. It's just noteworthy that the Oblates, the times are changing for them, and so there's a shift in their demographics, and so perhaps there'll be an oblate bishop again someday. But Prince George is turning from a missionary diocese into a more stable, just not necessarily a missionary diocese anymore, and so that was why the Oblates were there, and now the times have changed. But even our current bishop has told me that impromptu visits are very real, that First Nations people have come all by the local high school here. Now, some people think that Bishop O'Grady's still alive. That was a long time ago, so I don't think that's the case anymore. But they come by to tell whoever that of their experience with Bishop O'Grady back in the day. So that's interesting. Knew all the Indigenous students at the Prince George College, which is now called O'Grady. So that was what he called it, the first Catholic high school up here. He knew them by name. For years, would have his meals with them in the school cafeteria every day. In the evenings, he would visit their residences and spend time with them, listening to them. This is true. There are still residences. Indeed, I was living in one of those residences not so long ago. Not exactly the trailers, the resident trailer ATCO sort of modular home things, portables, whatever you want to call them, that were used for that. But I was in a residence on church property, a few feet away from those, and would have been a place that definitely students would have visited for fellowship and for food and that sort of thing when the brothers and sisters were living in the residence that I was living in just a few weeks ago, for these few last months. And so, of course, Bishop O'Grady asked elders to teach the language and culture classes at school. And of course, his goal in building Prince George College was to give his students, and of all colors and creeds, the skills needed to change. He also hoped to continue on to university and included grade 13 in the school, which wasn't needed when the College of New Caledonia was built a few years after. So those are just some points that I'm kind of pointing out there when it comes to this story of Bishop O'Grady and what's going on there. And I mean, I will admit that there's some pieces of this that are written that are quite they're well, and I mean, you can find the full link yourself. It'll be the Prince George Citizen. You just punch in O'Grady and Prince George Citizen into Google, and you'll find this whole thing. But I think what I'm trying to point out here is that there's two sides to every story. And I mean, we know this even of the miniature, the most smallest kind of quote unquote, complicated characters of your life. If you have an uncle who has a bit of a penchant for the bottle, I'm guessing that his family and his wife have some difficulties there. But at the same time, maybe you went fishing once with your uncle, and when your uncle passes from psoriasis or whatever else, you're going to go up at the funeral, and the story that you have of your uncle isn't some of the bad stories other people have. You have this one really good story of going fishing with your uncle. And I'm kind of using that as a placeholder. I'd probably say of my grandfather, that's exactly, I mean, I was 15 when my grandfather died, but he had a very rough relationship with with my father and with others, and that had to do with his alcoholism. But my experience of my grandfather is very different than theirs, and so I have a mostly positive memory of my grandfather in a way they don't. And so there's this fundamental difference opinion, or a difference of understanding. And we all understand this. This is human, right? This is human nature. We all get this. This isn't rocket science. You can have this with your wife. You can have this with your coworker. You can have this with your child. You can have this with your teacher. So the idea that somebody had a completely different experience than you with this particular person isn't rocket science. That's normal. That's real life every day. Someone says, I hate that guy. You're like, why? I mean, like, he seems like a nice guy, and I've talked with him. He doesn't seem like a bad person. Well, he cut me off in traffic once. Like, that's people's life, right? All the time. And so I guess what I'm getting to with the O'Grady question is that Bishop O'Grady had done an awful lot when it came to First Nations things. We have and even here, this kind of comment: the government built the residential schools, made the rules, and had the churches run them. In past, in public schools, the government had truant officers come to home and see kids weren't at school. Yeah, we all remember truant officers. Well, remember them. I had never lived through that, but it's still to this day there are rules about that. So I think that kind of the way that I'm trying to kind of capitalize on this question is that ultimately. There's two sides to every story, and the two sides to every story when it comes to Bishop O'Grady are quite complicated. We'll revisit this again once we're kind of completed our conversation with Mr. Trost. He'll be on in a few more minutes, but I wanted to do just one more thing before we got on with that, and that was to highlight a story that actually my own mother sent me just a few minutes ago, and that is that drug overdoses went way up during the pandemic. So I'm going to bring on my share screen once again. I'm going to go over, find my drug overdose thing. And here we go. So drug overdose deaths up 30% in pandemic year, government data shows. So again, two different stories. We're told that there's this pandemic. We're told that there's this, there's some really desperate things going on in the world when it comes to the virus. I mean, it's all starting to feel like it was so far in the past already, because things are starting to loosen up in British Columbia. I understand that over there in Alberta, things are still kind of sideways, and that's a problem. But hopefully that turns out better rather than worse soon. But I think that it feels like it's in the past already. It feels like we're kind of out of this pandemic. People's attitudes have significantly changed, but there's still some fallout that needs to be recognized here. So here's a perfect example. Again, drug overdose deaths up 30% in the pandemic year, government data shows. So mortality from all types of drug overdoses increased by a whopping 30% over a 1-year period. Nora Volkow, Dr. Nora Volkow, MD, director of the National Institute on Drug Overdose, reported at the FDA's Science Forum. So this was published on June 1st. Data from the National Center for Health Statistics from October 2019 to October 2020 shows that mortality from overdoses from all types of drugs increased 30%, from 70,000 deaths in October of 2019 to 91,000 deaths as of October 2020. And I think that is the number. That is a number that is very, very chilling. Volkow. It could be Volkow or it could be Volkow, especially if it's German or Polish, said at the forum. Among those deaths, those overdose deaths in both years, more than half came from synthetic opiates, which is to say fentanyl. So let's just do that number again right there. We had 70,000 deaths from drug overdoses in 2019, give or take, and of course about 90,000 in 2020. That's a pretty significant jump. Obviously, that's 20,000 people. 20,000 people is a quarter of my town's population. 20,000 people is a football stadium, I think, in some of the bigger cities in the United States. I think they can hold 20 to 30,000 people. I've never been to one. They're big though. And on it goes. Like 20,000 is not a small number. And obviously that's over a population of 300 million, because I believe this is published out of the United States, because that was the FDA. So that's the United States. But nonetheless, that's a significant increase in deaths. And again, I think that something to kind of cue in on there is that there's a line or a scene in The Big Short. I never actually watched the whole thing, but I remember there's a scene where somebody explains to you how numbers work, and they say, every percentage point, like 0.01 percentage points, the tenths and hundredths of percentage points of unemployment equals another 1,000, 2,000, or 5,000 suicides. That every time that number goes up, like people kill themselves. Like it's a direct correlation between unemployment and killing yourself. And we all know that because we've met people and we've lost people that way as well. We've met people like that and that were in that state of life and lost those people, unfortunately. And I think to the same effect when it comes to the drug overdose problem. We know that in 2020, things were pretty tough for a lot of people. They were forced to leave their jobs. They were forced to do things that they didn't know how to do anymore. They're forced to live on subsistence or quite literally go bankrupt due to the virus and the pandemic. And so that means that number is magnitude times higher for actual like overdoses. Those are the ones that resulted in death. So you don't get to 20,000 more deaths directly, right? There wasn't just 20,000 more people who used drugs that year who died. That's not a net number, right? Well, that's a net number. It's not a gross number. So somewhere out there is a number saying, I don't know how many people have to play with drugs, and that sounds kind of awful maybe to say play with, but to use drugs, abuse drugs, right? Abuse them or use them or be addicted to them or have things go wrong with them or simply be at a party and have somebody offer something to them and then unfortunately die. For you to get to 20,000 more deaths. But that's a large number. It's much larger than 20,000. It's not 5,000. It's not 10,000 more than that. It probably is 3 to 4 times that many are using the drugs and a quarter of them passed or maybe more. So that's a huge amount more drug use in a single year. Having any kind of substance use disorder also affects the risk of getting COVID-19. So apparently there's a direct correlation between making yourself vulnerable through drug use and getting COVID-19. And finally, to find out how these new ways of prescribing, so they want to know how to get people off of substance abuse and to see whether diversion has increased the result of relaxed rules. They're dedicating a couple well, a couple of grand, 100,000 to it. Finally, one thing the healthcare must do is stop stigmatizing people who have substance abuse disorders and start treating it as a mental health issue. That's an interesting point. Damien Sellis, not the virus, not a pandemic, please. And I mean, I keep trying to use language that would probably try and cross both sides of that divide. I mean, I could throw air quotes over everything, but there's also audio recordings of this show. So if I start throwing up air quotes, unless I have a perfect tone to go with them that I use every time, the people who are listening to audio only are going to get a little lost. I think maybe the place to queue up is that kind of the pivot here is if there was that many people who started using more drugs for the sake of the economic downturn that happened, and that we have that much more suffering and that much more economic devastation, I genuinely don't know. I genuinely don't know what was worse, right? The quote unquote disease, the thing that happened last year, the 2020 problem, we might call it someday, or the cure that we had. He's forgiven me. He's forgiven me. Thanks, Damien. What was worse? Was the cure or the disease? I have fallen solidly on the side of. I've said this a couple of times, but I'll just restate my position. Do I believe that the virus exists? I actually do. So if that's a problem, then feel free to unsubscribe and unlike and leave this channel. I understand. Do I think that it's as deadly as it's been pictured? No, I don't. I really don't. I think for very vulnerable people, it can be quite deadly. But that's the flu, and that's all sorts of other things in our lives. There's plenty of things that are very deadly to people who are already diabetic, etc. So that's not a problem. That's to be expected. What comes up next? Do you believe that the methods we used to try and stop the spread of this virus, do you think they worked? I don't think they worked. I think they were ineffective. Okay. And do you believe that the cost was worth that you got what you pay for with all the economic devastation? Did we get what we paid for? Did we save the world? My answer is no. And I do believe that more people died as a result of the cure than of the disease. That is my fundamental opinion. Do I think this was planned? Do I think people had a coordinated attack upon our freedoms and liberties? That they were plotting to do this from the beginning? That you never put a good crisis to waste? I believe that people leaned into what was already available. Inertia is the single greatest reality in the universe, other than gravity. So when you start at motion, when you start with things headed a certain direction, if you have a moving ship, you can do all sorts of things with a moving ship that you can't do with a still ship. And it takes something very small, very, very small, to change that. To try and lift up, if one of the things I have to practice for my wedding is dancing. Okay, because I don't know a lot about dancing. I got to work on it. My beloved is a good swing dancer. And I have to learn how to do this stuff. And it's been nerve-wracking, to tell you the truth. I actually really enjoy learning it, but it's not, I'm quite far behind. And so I have a lot to learn. But what I've learned, if nothing else, is that you have to keep your feet moving and you have to keep that momentum. If you don't keep the momentum, now you're just a brick that somebody's trying to lift or spin or turn or whatever, right? So case in point, if even a woman who isn't petite and a man who isn't super, well built and strong, if the two of them work at it, they can actually swing dance quite well together, because if she keeps her momentum going and he knows how to compensate, he can actually swing dance her very well. What does this mean about what's going on when it comes to the pandemic of all things? Seems like a bizarre crossover, but it's there. And the reason it's there is that it comes down to inertia. Even if you have this virus that actually isn't nearly the Black Plague or anything else that's ever swept across the world and killed everybody, like even the influenza epidemic that followed the First World War. So you have this thing that isn't nearly that deadly. But at the same time, you have somebody who, again, maybe they're not even perfectly prepared for it, but they've always had it in the back of their mind that they're going to grab this thing and just go with it and lead this thing in the direction they want to go. You have a recipe for some really big disaster. And that's what I think happened there. There were people who are always kind of scheming that, hey, if we ever had the opportunity to try, full COVID communism, they wouldn't have known it was called COVID at the time. But I mean, if they wanted to try it, they wanted to try and curtail freedoms. They wanted to shut down churches and see how that would go. They would try and get universal conformity when it came to masks, enforcement, freedom of speech, try and control the media. If they ever had the opportunity to run a little game, they were going to use it the same way as if you're if your kids suddenly decided that they were going to some aspect of your child's personality was suddenly changing and it was changing for the better. Well, you might lean into that. Or your spouse or your coworker or your friend. If that aspect of their personality suddenly changed, you might really, really get excited. You always hoped to change, so then you leaned into it. And I guess that's putting a positive spin on it. But on a negative spin, yeah, people are always strategizing to a point. They're not geniuses, but they're always looking for an opportunity. We're concupiscent. That's why I love that word. We're concupiscent. And that means we're always tending towards a kind of selfish end. And our government and our leaders are no different on that count. And now we're suffering the consequences of that. They were given ultimate power for a couple of months, for a couple of weeks, a couple of days. And that has gone into now what is almost a couple of years. And it might never leave. The same way the post-war, the war measures never left. The way that we prosecuted the war, the methodologies we had, the big manufacturing plants, the American war industrial complex, military industrial complex that kept seeking new conflicts because it had all these excess war materials it needed to get rid of. So it might as well find a new place to seek conflict. That is a real reality. And I think we need to be honest about that. But it comes all the way back. If we want to use the analogy of swing dancing, or you want to use the analogy of a ball rolling down a hill, getting something started, moving a boulder, moving a tree, a log, human beings are not that big and they're not that strong. But if you give them a little bit of leverage and the thing that they're trying to move suddenly starts getting inertia, right? We've all had to rock something to get it moving. And once it starts getting that inertia, you're actually able to get it to go somewhere. That is, I think, kind of the simplest way to explain what happened with the pandemic. It was a bit of inertia. It was just that little spark that was needed, that little bit of a catalyst to finally exacerbate and show the cracks and fault lines and the new opportunities for anybody who's well poised to enforce their will. So that's where I would start with that. And I think that's what it means when it comes to the pandemic. Was it a plandemic? Maybe in China it was, but outside of that, I think that everything else was. And by plandemic in China, I would say that's more just that. I don't know if anybody purposely leaked it, but once they found out that it was leaked, the virus, they leaned into it a bit, but at least managed it. Because even if you're trying to stop it and in you managing it, you are planning a way of dealing with it. So that's where I would start with that. I think that's my very, I think, moderate take. It's not a hot take. It's a pretty moderate take. The virus, yes, it's real. Yes, very deadly. Deadly enough. 2 people who are predisposed or pre-diagnosed or are unfortunately very ill already. They're diabetic, etc. Does that mean that everything is that we should all have shut down the world? No. And did shutting down the world kill more people than the virus? My opinion, yes, it did. So that's my 2 cents on that. We're gonna keep waiting in the wings here. Eventually, our beloved guest is going to show up, but we're going to go and kind of take a look at some of the comments we've had on this so far. One of the comments that we had was I had brought up the point of capital punishment. This is a really long comment, pretty much covering my face, but that's okay. There is a time and place for capital punishment. We all know which abominable crimes qualify. I am fine with non-negotiable, no chance of being released for any reason, life in solitary confinement with no luxury or upgraded amenities, only the basis for staying a very basic quality of life, would give them time and opportunity to think about what they have done. That's an interesting point. I will say that one of the great cynicisms of some of our uniform members, which is to say members of the RCMP and other agencies. They laugh at our Canadian understanding of things because they really believe that there's no such thing as life in prison in Canada. Anybody can apply for parole. Nobody serves a real life sentence. It never happens. It never occurs. Always, one way or another, you get out. You get out early on good behavior. And so it's important for people to understand that, at least to our own law enforcement, they laugh it off in a very cynical, macabre way, to be clear. And I'm not trying to denigrate them. I understand they have a hard job, and having a cold one and laughing off just how terrible the world is. That I mean, I've done it, and we all need to do it every now and again. We all need our release to kind of be honest about what's going on out there and how hard it is and how difficult it is and how ugly it is at times. But the point that I would draw here is that, if that's their understanding, the people who actually catch these people, the people who arrest people who have just committed a heinous crime, still looking at them like, no, look, I don't care what you say. These people are still going to apply for parole, and prison's not that bad as far as a lot of our law enforcement members think. Then maybe that's just it. Maybe Donna has got a point there when it comes to like, well, maybe we should just, if you've committed that heinous crime, but we're not going to bring back capital punishment, you should just live in a box. I don't know. I feel like I'm both harsher and looser on these questions of criminality. On the one hand, I think that capital crimes, right, premeditated murder, rape, and the rest of it, these things need to be punished with the death penalty to be the fullest extent of the law. The thing is, I guess it's funny. I did become a prison reform, not advocate, but at least every now and again, whenever the topic comes up, I start yelling about it. I did become more in favor of prison reform after I learned that you can't smoke in prison anymore. Now, I quit smoking. I had to quit smoking, or else I wasn't going to be able to be with my beloved. She wasn't down for that. So I had to quit smoking, and I did quit smoking. That was actually before we got together, but that's a different point altogether. And I had to quit smoking, and I miss it a lot at different times. But the point is that it was always a kind of religious experience for me, but I'm not going to get into that whole thing right now. But the point is that if nothing else, I do believe that, I kind of believe in that old rule about, it was alcohol, tobacco, and coffee that won the war. It was beatnik drugs that gave us anti-bullying legislation. So if you want to smoke a bunch of dope and decide what to do with your life after, hazing out, I mean, that's, I don't think anybody I don't think anything ever started. Speaking of inertia, we've been dwelling on that a lot this morning. I don't think life goes well with the dope and the, just kind of sitting there and being not really present to the world, whatever else. I think the stimulant of nicotine, I think the kind of bizarre, very complicated depressant that is alcohol, and of course the other diuretic stimulant. It's not even a stimulant; it's just a blocker of your tiredness, which is coffee. Somehow, some way, these things get you going. And certainly, nicotine and coffee are a staple for a lot of people. And so when I learned that there was no nicotine in jail, well, maybe they give them patches, but I doubt it. But there's no smoking in jail. I sat there and I was like, you know what? Human beings are a lot of things. But human beings aren't animals, and you can't decide for them what they can and can't, how they can and can't feed themselves or treat themselves on these counts. I guess they're in prison. You can make that argument. They're in prison, so they have no right to have a smoke or a relaxing fresh breath of air going out for a fresh air break into the yard. But I just kind of sat there and I was like, you know what? Like, no, I'm sorry. People, I don't believe in sin taxes, and I do believe that people have a right. People have a right to their, I don't even know if I want to call it vices, but their ability to medicate themselves and release themselves. They have a right. They at least have the privilege of human beings of being able to exercise the freedom of choice around that question. That's what I'm trying to say. And when you rob them of that, you are treating them in an inhuman way that's deeply, deeply, deeply dark, that I don't think people acknowledge, and people don't understand it. You know, I think it we need to do more on this question. I think that petty crime needs to be treated differently. I don't think criminalizing poverty helps things. I was just talking about that bylaw yesterday on this show. That doesn't help anything. You're going to fine people, even for the drug paraphernalia and stuff that's happening in downtown Prince George here, and then downtowns throughout Canada. I mean, this is Canada. We got problems in our downtowns that date back to when Pierre Trudeau was still ruling this country. We've not really left the homeless, intransigent, unhoused, and drug-addled issues of our time from the 70s onwards. We're all still stuck in the 1970s. I mean, just look at the way some of us Canadians dress. We're still stuck in the 1970s. Every now and again, actually, I walk down the road, and it can happen in Winnipeg. It can happen in Prince George. It can even happen in, I was in Ottawa briefly. It can happen in Ottawa. It's a little more rare, but still. And you just see a Canadian who just walked right out of the 1970s. And you're like, I'm sorry, did you not get the memo that was like 50 years ago? That was in the 2010s. So it was 40 years ago. This is 50 years ago now. Like, are you okay? Like, do you need help? But yeah, that's Canada. Canada's just stuck in the 70s, and it's never going to get out. Until, I don't know, a serious generational change. Where was I going with this? I think I was going to the point of when we treat people a certain way. I think G.K. Chesterton put it this way: a man shouldn't be a slave to drink, but a man also should always have a choice to drink. And you can't, because otherwise he doesn't have freedom. And it's kind of the same thing here. The prison reform question for me, I have no time for serial killers. I have no time for people who are criminal masterminds and major drug pins. I think these people need to be tried by a jury of their peers. And then once they're found guilty, given their access to whatever holy man or shaman that they want to talk to for the next 2-3 months, is going to help them put their souls to rest. And then they're going to be executed. No problem. That's how it is. And actually, if you're wondering what method of execution is the most useful or likely to succeed, it's actually firing squad. Firing squad and hanging. Obviously, guillotine's pretty effective too, but firing squad has been pretty effective. So, I mean, that's the other problem. I don't understand why in the United States they use lethal injection, because all I ever hear about is how it's going wrong and not working. It's like, no, let's just get back to something that works. Don't torture the person. Like, just if they're going to be executed, just execute them. The issue here, though, the issue here, though, is that when it comes to that petty crime stuff, and when it comes to poverty, and when it comes to just people living their lives on a very hard end of the spectrum, I have a problem with the idea that you can't smoke in prison. And I have a problem that you can't, that we would punish the least of these with sin taxes and with overcompensation of these things. So I'm pretty worried about that, to be honest with you, because I think it shows a deep inhumanness. People say it's for their good. People say, I even see people who I like genuinely respect, who are good Christian people. I really do respect these people, and they're not Puritans by any means. I've met people who are not Puritans, who still hold the opinion of like, well, I mean, they have to pay their share, and like, they have a choice, and they don't have to spend it on cigarettes or booze or whatever. I sit there and I look at them and I go, you know what? Like, sure you don't, but you know what? It might be all you have. It might be all you have. And that's the thing that kind of gets to me about it. Whether we're talking about prisoners, or we're talking about the impoverished, or we're talking about, the least of these, and people on the hardest ends of life, it's not that I'm saying their vices are okay, or that they don't have other choices to make, or better choices to even make. I just don't believe, if somebody's face is in the mud, I don't think that our job as a society is to put your foot on the back of their head and help shove them in further. And that's how I view sin taxes, and that's how I view not smoking in jail. That's how I view it. and Pamela's making a point about lighters and weapons in jail. I don't care what the methodology is, how we would have to facilitate that. I don't want people to suddenly start using their vices and their tools for their vices as weapons. Obviously I'm not arguing that. I don't know how you facilitate that. I don't know if everybody gets has to go through the smoking corridor where only one person can fit and it's only one direction. I don't know. I don't care. Obviously, we facilitated this in a past time without them becoming weapons, at least not commonly, because it was allowed for so long. I don't know how we change culture to do that, but get there, because that's better. It's better. It's better than treating it like an animal that you're disciplining it as if you have complete authority over them in this way. I don't think that's correct. And this is just it. Like, it might be all they have. It might be all they have. And when it comes to sin taxes, I have no time for that. It's wrong. It's very wrong. It is what it is. Yeah, I mean, I'm getting some definitely some throwbacks here for a few different things. Poor Donna is giving me some guff on this point. That smoking is a luxury. You want to stop choosing criminal behavior, and who pays for the health issues while in prisons? Certainly not the criminal. Yeah, I mean, you have to remember that I'm pretty consistent on this point. I don't believe in socialized medicine. I think our socialized system is a sham. That leaves a lot of people behind. It costs them almost as much as it might if they just had a third party sort of things. But I think that I guess the short version is that I don't really have a problem with people choosing to do these things to themselves, because I also don't really believe that they need the socialized system to take care of them, because I think they already know what their choices were. And also the fact is that no amount of taxes will ever pay for it. That's an interesting point. We'll get back to that, but actually, this all ties in. It's funny because you can tie all this stuff in back together. So we've talked about inertia. We've talked about treating people with dignity. Ironically, also talked about executing people, because that's, in my opinion, that's actually treating them with dignity. There's a way to earn your way out of this life, and that's by taking other people's lives. But let's pivot back here to the point of what you need to do when it comes to these questions of socialized medicine and that sort of thing. And even Bishop O'Grady and the schools. So do you know why we use the residential school system in Canada? Do you want to know the real reason? The real reason is, as expensive as those schools were to build, the people staffing them were cheap. They were extremely cheap. Okay. And this is the problem with Canada now, is that we do the exact opposite. We don't just build pretty expensive buildings. You should see the RCMP detachment that we have downtown at Prince George. That's a nice building. I'm not saying RCMP don't deserve to have some kind of building. I'm just saying that is a nice building. And I don't know what that cost, but that was way too much money. But the point is that, and it probably still isn't even functional. I bet you half the members there think it's unfunctional. It's a nice, pretty building they work at, but they don't think it's a very functional building, I bet you. But the point is that we used to build expensive buildings to house children, mostly Aboriginal children, for school. But the people inside of those buildings, unless they were lay people, and even then, were paid very, very little, especially if they were clergy or brothers and sisters, because you can pay a brother or a sister nothing because they take a vow of poverty. So you can pay them enough to feed them, and they don't have a family, and they effectively have a pension fund, which is you just get taken care of by your other brothers and sisters when you get sickly and ill and elderly, and that's it. So that's how we used to run the system. So everything really does come back to money. And that's it. If you can't pay someone enough to love somebody, it's not possible. You just can't. It just can't happen. You can't do it. It doesn't exist. How much money would I need to pay you to love someone? How much is that worth, loving somebody else? The answer is an infinite amount of money. There's no limit. Love is infinite, and therefore you can't pay for it. So you can pay for somebody to kind of care enough to not ignore your baby for you, or not ignore your grandmother for you, or not ignore your sick child for you. Like that's you can almost pay someone enough to do that. They'll never be as attentive as you are to your own grandmother or your own mother or your own child or your own brother or whatever. They never will. But you could pay them just enough to kind of keep the lights on, make sure that they're dosed properly, make sure that they're, they're sleeping in their hospital bed and that sort of thing. And that's exactly it. So the problem is that once you're trying to pay people to love people and do the actions of love, which is to take care of somebody unconditionally, you're paying an impossible amount. And so I think that that's where I'll kind of leave that for now, because we got Brad in the wings here. But I think that that's where I would start with. We have to be honest about what's going on here. You cannot pay people enough to love people. And that's why the system that we've come up with is probably never going to work. But that's okay. We're going to get back on that topic after we have Brad on the show. We're going to bring him on right away. Brad, I think I need you to, because something is going wrong there. I had to mute your microphone. We're having a little bit of an echo problem. General. Green screen guests. I wonder where my producer is. My producer is remoting in. Producer, could you please help Brad with what's going on here? Producer? I don't know if he's around. I'm gonna shoot him a message. But we'll take him off the stream there for a moment. Sheldon Jones, helicopter. That's brilliant. I'm just gonna shoot my producer a message here and just see if I can't get him to fix that for me. Da-da-da-da. Where did you go? For Pete's sake. Oh, well, this is the nature of these things when you do these things live. And I'm having to learn this stuff because we're remoting in, right? So, sound problems with Brad. Yeah, he's just grabbing some headphones, so hopefully that improves things. And everything will come together here. Interesting. No, it's still not working. That's my end, unfortunately. Yeah, we're having issues. What is this suggesting? Try that again. No, that's not working. Into private chat. I'm going to message my producer again here, just kind of see what's going on there. And in the meanwhile, I'm going to punt Brad from there. I'll let my producer figure that out. Yeah, I think I try to be consistent on this point. It's not that I think that somehow socialized medicine has no value or whatever. I mean, I'm talking to a guy from Saskatchewan today, and I'm from Saskatchewan. I mean, obviously Tommy Douglas did a great thing giving us socialized medicine, but I don't think Tommy Douglas ever thought everything would be socialized. I think somebody wrote something on that in the National Post a couple of years back. And the other thing that I think needs to be understood is that, again, like, we keep adding, again, with the sin tax question, we keep adding taxes to our cigarettes and our alcohol, and now marijuana is legalized. At what point do we be honest about it and go, you know what, we keep adding these taxes, but nothing gets better. Like, we're building gigantic cancer centers. Well, then what are those people going to work at after we cure cancer? I guess. I don't know. It's all nonsense. Like, that money goes somewhere and it goes into general revenue. Like, that's where it goes. It's not as if every single cent of sin tax on cigarettes and alcohol and everything else goes directly to medicine, right? It doesn't. it goes into general revenue, and the government uses it for all sorts of silly projects. And so that's where my deep cynicism comes in. It doesn't matter what kind of empire you're building; you're always building an empire. And you're going to fund that empire with whatever money you have on hand. And that's why I don't want to give you the money, because I know what you're going to do with it. It's me. That sounds like when you talk to someone, don't give money to people on the street; they just use it to buy whatever. It's like, don't give money to government; they just use it to buy whatever they want. Sin taxes don't correct sins. Sin taxes don't fix sins. Sin taxes don't fund our hospitals. Sin taxes go into general revenue like everything else, and they spend it on all the same nonsense. So I don't have a lot of time for that. They are saying restart computer. Well, that's all right. So we'll let I'm going to bring Brad back to the stream. Oh, no, he left. So remove. And they're going to restart his computer. Yeah, I mean, we got some comments here. Thank you, Sheldon. That's what I've been trying to say the whole time. It is a tax on the poor. That's all sin taxes are. It's a tax on the poor. And Daryl, to your point, the Stephen Truscott trial. I'm not an argument here. That's why I keep saying jury of your peers. Jury of your peers with clear lines of evidence, reasonable doubt. No question at all. But when you're, oh, here we go. We've got Buddy here. Nope. We're going to let him take a minute. And that's just it, though. That's just it. It's a tax on the poor. And we've got Brad on one more time. Still a helicopter. That's okay. That's just because Brad's decided to identify as an Apache attack helicopter. That's what's going on there. No, Brad's like, that's not funny. Well, it's the age we live in, right? I mean, you got to crack jokes about anything. This show's live. Like, I think that's the other thing that needs to be told to like the audience here and everything else. Like the show's live. Like there's no cutting to commercial here. I could do the 1 minute countdown. I think the closest we ever did that was one time we had to bring people into the studio, and so what we did is we did put up the counter, the 1 minute countdown, and we rearranged the entire studio like in a single 60 seconds. Like, I had to move my chair over, bring his chair in, put up the 2 microphones, throw our headphones on, and plug them into the jack, which goes into a different place because now you've got 2 people sitting there, not one. It just got completely out of hand, and so, but we did it. We did it in 60 seconds. It was like a drill. But we're going to go through some of our comments right now while we just wait in the wings. Here's an interesting one. Who is Brad Trost? He used to be a Conservative MP in Saskatchewan, but what's unique about him? The big unique thing about Brad, I mean, I'm going to let him tell his own story, but I think something that's unique about Brad is that he's actually a principled conservative. An age of completely unprincipled, unconservative people calling themselves Tories. He cares about the things that matter. Which is to say, faith and family, firearms and farms as well. Those are always my favorite things. But I think when it comes to what Brad is trying to do, Brad, when he was running for leadership, he tried to build a brilliant coalition. He almost took the leadership himself at one point. And I think that he posed a threat to the establishment of the Conservative Party, and he was a sign that the social conservatives could really get behind someone and do something and get somewhere. And they took him out. That's my opinion. They made sure they could push him out. I think that was wrong. It was unfair. And they keep doing this to socially conservative people inside of the party. They keep trying to filter them out, which I don't really understand, because social conservatives make up a huge amount of the base of the party. And I really don't understand why they would do this to people. So it's a waste of time, but that's on me. So I think that the answer to it all is that if you're looking for kind of answers on, well, who's Brad Trost and what's he up to, I think that's kind of where I would start with. It's like a principled guy, a caring guy, a guy who's done a lot of things for our, as an MP and everything else, and as a leader contestant. And the problem is, of course, that social conservatives don't really get much of a hearing in our time. And so I'm just happy to have him on the show today. We're still working on that end. We'll get him there as soon as we can. But in the meantime, I think it's important to note that, social conservatives in Canada have definitely had some pretty hard things thrown at them. It's a difficult thing. I've had some other comments here. Arthur Me, he's actually a pretty consistent commenter on here. I can't really tell what that's a picture of. That almost looks like he's on the ocean or something and about to go diving or something. I don't really know what that is. But anyways, with science, the world needs 12 times to look over the world scientists and a new law for politicians. If you break the law, government, and I don't really know what that means. But let's try one more time. Hello, Brad.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now.
Smartphones work, but my computer doesn't. My apologies.
Oh, please. It's not a problem at all. Not a problem at all. I'm glad to have you on the show. So let's just do it right from the top. Well, I'm speaking with Brad Trost, who is seeking the nomination for, let's see if I can get this right, Moose Jaw, Lanigan, Lake Center, as the conservative nominee for that riding. And he's here with me today to talk to us about his journey previously as a member of parliament and his journey now as he seeks to represent the people of Saskatchewan once again. Welcome to the program.
Good to be here, even though it took me my time to get here. I'm in Good Riders Green today. And, what one guy said to me, the only good thing about last year's pandemic, first season, the Riders went undefeated in history. We'll never have that again. So
there it is. Well, and I mean, I'm a son of Saskatchewan myself, and when I have to cheer for anything, I do cheer Rough Riders. So there you go.
It's a strange, the loyalty we have in this province. Now, to give you a little bit of background about my family, though, and where I come from, my dad and my two uncles never cheered for the Saskatchewan Rough Riders, even though they were born and raised in Saskatchewan. You think, how did such a horrible, horrible thing happen? Well, when they grew up, the CCF ran Saskatchewan, that's the forerunners of the NDP, and the Social Credit ran Alberta and BC. So my dad cheered for the Eskimos, my uncle for the Stampeders, and my other uncle for the Lions. There was no way they were cheering for a football team that was associated with the socialist province.
There it is. Well, I mean, that's a funny thing about Saskatchewan is that it was the beginning of kind of socialized ideas in Canada, particularly socialized medicine. But how did Saskatchewan go from being what it was, a CCF stronghold, to where it is today, which is a conservative stronghold? Would you mind telling us about that?
Well, I think different people have different theories, but I'm going to teach people a little bit of history of Saskatchewan here. And one of the things also people have to understand, if you're like me and you're really into politics, you're an ideological guy. You got right, wrong, free markets, etc. But a lot of people don't really think in politics in base of policy and ideology. They think of it as group, as an interest, as in does this person speak to me emotionally? And if you start to think about politics a little bit more like that, you start to understand Saskatchewan. Because as much as people talk about Saskatchewan having been a really socialist left-wing province, yeah, they elected parties that were of the left. But this is what you got to understand. Saskatchewan's underlying culture was that of agrarian populists. These were people who believed in farming. Agriculture dominated this province in the 1920s, 30s, and 40s and still has a grip now. But they were fundamentally populists. And if you look at the history of populism, it can be right of center. We look now with Trump and different things like that. Or it used to be viewed as more left-wing. You go back into American history with people like William Jennings Bryan, the progressives, all that way. And that's when you start talking about Saskatchewan, the first thing you've got to understand. This is a populist culture, has been for 100 years. And at one time, the left was the populists. Now it tends to be the right. And that's one of the fundamentals when you start to get into our history.
And that spirit of populism, it's getting stronger in Canada these days. So it's interesting that that Saskatchewan was almost a forerunner in a way that would eventually come about again when it comes to what's happening throughout the Western world, particularly the Anglosphere. What do you see happening in Canada when it comes to the populist front? There isn't. Canada seems to have resisted the populist bug to a certain extent. It's not taken over as it has in America and England and throughout Europe. What's different about Canada, or is this about to break? Is that wave about to turn?
I don't know for sure, but I'll give, again, I'm a bit of a history buff, and I'll give my perspective on where populism was in Canada and how I think it can grow. Populism, again, was more of a Western Canadian, rural Quebec thing with some streaks in parts of Ontario. Why was that? Well, you look at who settled Western Canada, we didn't have a real class structure here. Unless you go to some of the more British centric areas, which was Winnipeg and sort of the lower mainland, Victoria, Vancouver, when it was really British Columbia, and not sort of, more of an Asian people from the interior mixture, we didn't have class structures. Europe, all those other places that had real hierarchies, they didn't have populism. So the prairies didn't have had populism, and rural Quebec, with the voting of the Crédits, the Union Nationale, parties like that were populist. But the culture of Canada politically, founded by the United Empire Loyalists, was not really that populist. These are the people who backed the Queen and Country, or King and Country at the time. So I think that was one of the reasons why Ontario and Atlantic Canada have resisted the populist wave, because they were historically the anti-populists. The US was the country of populism. We were the party of peace, order, country of peace, order, and good government. And again, if you're from Western Canada and your ancestors took off running from Eastern Europe, you don't really care much about the American Revolutionary War, the institutions that are set up from there. You don't give a hoot. You want your piece of land. You want the communists to stay away forever. And yeah, you don't want either big business or your neighbor telling you what to do. So it's like each man for himself. So I think that was the historical reasons why populism wasn't progressing in all of Canada. It was more of a regionalized thing. But, and this is the interesting thing, I think historically we're now at a point where those long distant ties have sort of been broken. We've got new Canadians dominating in Toronto and Vancouver. They don't have real fixed political allegiances, and whoever is up and willing to talk to them and meet their needs, I think that's where actually populism could really take off. New Canadians, they're a lot more right wing than people believe, and they don't always feel they have a voice. So I actually think there's a way that sort of Western Canadian populists can go and talk to new Chinese immigrants who hate the communist government in China, and that's why they left, and get them to be part of this movement for the people. So.
The riding that you're going to seek to represent is it's a new amalgamation, is it not? What I believe that the riding that you had formerly represented, actually, piece of the riding that you formerly represented, is in this riding. Do you find the new amalgamations that they lean to a more populist structure with some of them, or is they becoming too urban and the urban side makes them too stable?
Yeah, this is the difference where I'm beginning to see the difference now between Saskatchewan and Alberta, and why Saskatchewan has veered to the right of Alberta. I think it's the populist thing, because if you live in a place like Saskatoon, and I've lived in Saskatoon, Calgary, and Edmonton over the years, Saskatoon is still not sure it's a big city. It's still just a town where a lot of people happen to live. And I think that's one of the things I found with Calgary and Edmonton. You were getting more of a big city approach. So in Saskatchewan, we had about 20 years where we had blended ridings. And now I'm going back to a riding that used to exist roughly 20 years ago in this shape. So I don't know. When the last boundaries were drawn, we had an unfortunate draw, and we got a left-wing judge and a left-wing political science prof. So the only province in the country where the boundaries were deliberately drawn to help the left was Saskatchewan. We ended up with 14 seats in the last election. So go figure. Doesn't matter how they cook the books in this province, we're still going to win. And again, our rural populists, working class guys in the city. I mean, the big union place in Regina are the guys who make steel for pipelines. So whenever their NDP union leadership tell them, don't go support the Conservatives, they go, we want a pipeline. We want Donald Trump to build Keystone XL. We want a pipeline going through Vancouver, if you can put one through the port of Churchill. So we don't have that clear line between urban and rural and populism in Saskatchewan. And again, natural resource industry, and a lot of people grew up on the farms, even if they currently live in Saskatoon and Regina right now.
So let's get into your own background and your own story. So, of course, you are an honorable member, former member of our legislature in Ottawa, the Parliament, and you represented your riding for several years. How many years exactly is escaping me at the moment? I'm sorry, Brad.
It's okay. It was 15 years in total. So
That's right. I wanted to say 15, but for some reason 9 was egging at me. But nonetheless, as you represented the people of Saskatchewan, as you got to voice your opinions in Ottawa, and then you went on, of course, into a leadership race. I'm just interested to hear your story on these counts and what the choices were that got you involved in politics, how your experience was in Ottawa. Did you feel you could continue to represent your people there, or were they trying to march you back from Ottawa and tell you how to represent Ottawa to them? And finally, when you got into leadership and your attempt to help the Conservative Party stay with its principles, what kind of your understanding was from there? So let's just kind of go over the whole story.
Yep, this will take a while, so feel free to butt in and ask questions and so forth. So I was, typical Saskatchewan farm kid. Wasn't very good at hockey. I say I'm a better shot with my hockey stick than I am with my rifle, but to be honest, I'm a pretty bad shot with both. Typical Saskatchewan farm kid, didn't really know what I wanted to do. But I started volunteering for political campaigns when I was 12 years old. Mm-hmm. And I came from a family that my mother's side had literally fled the communists. There was no love lost for socialism in my family history. My grandma remembered the Civil War in Russia, the communists on one side, the White Army on the other, and the shelling. My dad was, as I said, he cheered for the Edmonton Eskimos because they were from a social credit province, a right-wing province, couldn't cheer for the CCF. By the time I grew up, Saskatchewan was no longer NDP, so I cheered for the Riders. But I'd volunteered for every last Conservative candidate, university, other things here, there, and everywhere. And I got trained as a geophysicist, did mining exploration work. I did diamond exploration, nickel, cobalt, copper, you name it, not oil and gas. There's guys who do geophysics that's not oil and gas. I was a mining guy, loved working in the territories. But whenever I had free time, I would volunteer to work for other candidates. And that got me in because I saw, you need two basic things, in my opinion, to be a good candidate. You've got to be able to communicate clearly, and you've got to have solid principles. And boy, did I run into guys who were solid on principles, but were scared to get in front of a microphone. To do an interview like this, they would, shake and freak out and do stuff. And then I met the guys with the smoothest communication skills. They could look you in the eye, tell you whatever you wanted. They could do the Bill Clinton, I feel your pain emotional thing. They had better emotional connections than Justin Trudeau with his fancy hair. And they had no principles. And I'd volunteered for a couple of the candidates like that, not knowing they were like that until I found out later. And, you quietly step away from campaigns. And so in 2004, I decided to run. And it was a strange situation. I was, 29-year-old young guy. And everyone thought I had not a hope in whatever to win the nomination because the former mayor of Saskatoon was running. And at that time, the majority of the riding was in Saskatoon. But here was one thing about him. He had previously been a long-time New Democrat. And 4 years earlier, Jean Chrétien and the Liberals had appointed him to run for the Liberals in a by-election. And now he was trying to run for the newly formed Conservative Party. It was like, no way. The guy's got no history, no principles. I'm not letting him win my riding's nomination. I'm going to go in there and fight him. And so that's how I got started. That's how I got in on my first election. The headline in the newspapers that day was not Trost wins nomination. They mentioned the former mayor loses because no one had heard of me. But a lot of the membership were of the same viewpoint. They didn't want someone who was just in one day and out the other and could switch parties running. So that's what started me to get going. So.
No, that's a place to start for sure. I think that question of principle is one we'll revisit in a little while because it seems like that's something the Conservative Party is missing right now. It seems to be a bit lost when it comes to its base and what the base wants and where to go from here, especially when they're trying to always pivot with the Liberal Party and how to win back voters from the Liberals. That's something we can get into a little bit later with strategy, but I appreciate your emphasis of the point of principle. Were you able to keep carrying your principles into Ottawa? Was it a struggle while you were there? You'd been elected, now you're in Ottawa. What was it like being in kind of the heart of the beast?
One of the things people always say that you get pressure to conform and things like that. I think one of the big advantages I had when I first got there, I was in a province where I think, trying to remember what we had. We had 13 or 12 of the 14 ridings that year were conservatives. And most of us were white guys. Okay. And we all knew the rules for advancement. You have to have so many from certain region. They want a gender balance. And, if you're sort of with a cultural group, that helps too. So a lot of us, especially the rookies like me, we knew we had no chance for advancement. So why worry about kissing up? And I think that was a really good thing, because you don't worry about anything. You're just so relaxed, because the pressures that people who get elected often feel are not overt pressures of people pushing. Their desires for advancement, and they get into the habit, I have to compromise just a little bit so I can advance. So I think the best thing that was for me was I got to Ottawa, I looked around and said, well, I'm never going to be anything but a good constituency guy, so that's what I'm going to concentrate on. I'm going to stick up for my people, and 100% guarantee I'll never make cabinet. Look, there were some great guys in cabinet, but I don't have to compromise. I think that was the best thing. And then when we were in opposition, the relentless drive to take down the corrupt Liberals. People forget Paul Martin was going to win a landslide, and then he got caught doing what Liberals naturally do, putting their hands in the cookie jar, some of the people, not even the Liberal MPs, it was the backroom boys. And that began to put stuff in. And then when we got into government, I'll say two things. One, I did break party ranks on a lot more issues than I think people realized. Two, one of the things you've got to understand about dealing with Stephen Harper, his number one interest in you when you were about to break ranks was this. Are you doing this for the cameras, or are you doing this if you deeply believe in it? Harper would put pressure on you to make you stand with the party and go along and get along and stuff like that. But in the end, if he actually believed you believed it as a core right principle, he would respect. And I can give you some illustrations later on in that. What drove him nuts, and I can appreciate this after being there, is if he thought you were just pandering to the cameras and breaking with the party. If you believed it in your soul was right, yeah, they try to force you, but then they would respect you. But if you wanted to pull some sort of stunt and pander, then they came down on you with a ton of bricks, and forget carrots, the sticks were laid out at that point. So that I understood after a while, and that's the thing. I stuck to my guns. And, there was odd things where democratic reform things that we were in government, we support now, but we didn't then. You'll find funny. This was after Harper was gone. And Harper hates the CBC, okay? He is no fan, nor was Jim Flaherty. But he never felt he had the political capital to go after them. So I put out a private members bill to scrap the CBC, the old line, do you support any particular media? And I always said, yeah, I support the CBC with my tax dollars, and I'm unhappy about it. So we'll scrap it. That was the time when they whipped the bill, when they whipped the voting caucus and pressured a lot of MPs who wanted to vote for it, not to stand with me. And it was a strange thing, because no conservative MP loves it. So under Harper, if you stuck to your guns, they'd put pressure on you, really tough. But if you believed it, Stephen respected you. If he thought you were just being a dumb ham, well, then he had no patience for dumb hams sticking up. And you know what? I don't totally blame him at that point. So that was sort of my experience of being an MP that's free or not free. So.
How did you see partisanship change over your time in caucus and your time in Ottawa? I understand that, when people arrived there, they felt like they had, I'm like, this is more amicable. And some people said that as things went on, things got less amicable, and the partisanship increased on both sides of the aisle. Did you manage to keep a good relationship with your colleagues across the aisle, or did things just get 2/10.
Yeah. You know what? I would say the temperatures go up and the elbows go out when people feel they're competing for something in the same space. This is the thing. You could always get along with the Bloc Québécois guys on a personal level because your voters and their voters were so different. You thought they were crazy. They thought you were crazy, but you were so different that you laughed about it and you were really relaxed. In areas where you're neck and neck and where there's real distinctive things that you care about, that's where the temperatures got up. I mean, for Western Canadian guys, we hated the gun registry with a passion. It meant something. We owned firearms. I'm a firearms owner. On issues like that, things would really get going. But if you would work with some rural liberals on trade issues where their guys were beef producers in their riding, and of course, Saskatchewan, we had tons of beef, it was easy to work with people then because you were trying to get the protectionism down on the US or European side. And so that was often where things got you could work together with people. I would say the biggest areas where you have elbows getting up is where you have people who are hyper or super ambitious, and they try to step on people not only in the other parties, but in their own caucuses too. There's a certain name, Belinda Stronach. You might remember her from way back. For viewers who don't remember, she was someone who ran for the Conservative leadership, but then crossed to join the Liberals when sort of offered a cabinet post. She was not well liked in the Conservative caucus, and we were kind of relieved that she was gone. And within 6 months, the Liberals were privately telling the Conservatives, we wish you guys had kept her. Why? Because she was only in it to step on people and move up the ladder for herself. And it's like anything else. If you've got co-workers who, want to get promoted on your back, you just get agitated with them. And that's one of the things. You watch guys in the House of Commons stretch the truth and try to step on a colleague or play a dumb game. No one respects them. And after a while, they get in trouble. I mean, privately, what a lot of the Liberal MPs over the years have said about Justin Trudeau, they would all get kicked out of their caucus if they ever got caught on a microphone on it. They don't like the guy any more than the average Conservative does, but he's their leader and they feel they're stuck with him. So that's one thing you've got to understand about the partisanship. A lot of it has to do with the swollen head egos that sit in different posts in leadership.
No, and that doesn't surprise me. That makes sense. It makes an awful lot of sense because that's the nature of it anywhere. In a family, in a business, in a church, it is ego rules the day, and ego can ruin things very quickly. That's why we subscribe to a religion that declares charity for all, including one's enemies. I think that as we kind of look at your time in Ottawa, and certainly as we get to that climax of the leadership run, why don't you tell us a little bit about the committee assignments and the visits that you made, the excursions you took as a member of Parliament, both internal and external, when it comes to Canada? What kind of vision were you trying to live out there? Were you trying to pick up Diefenbaker's mantle and have the North more developed? Were you trying to see Canada on the world stage respected, but in a position of strength, not just of softness or complicity or complacency? Or was it more of a kind of a dollars and cents thing that you wanted to see the bottom line in Ottawa just go down, that it didn't need to be spending so much and people could really do this stuff on their own? The civil servants didn't have to worry either. It's not just about worrying about the pennies. Like, really, people can do this for themselves.
Yeah, well, one of the things is I think you're laying that out in a grand strategic plan. And to be honest, I think I was like a lot of rookie members of Parliament. I was 29, turned 30 right before the election was called. I just wanted to go out there and beat the Liberals. Okay, that motivated me more than anything else. I wanted to beat the Liberals, and I wanted to do something for what I would use the term my people, my farmers, my blue collar, working class background people, the small business guys I'd worked for when I was in the geophysics industry. You just want to do something, okay? Because they're your people. If you're like I was, you grew up on the losing side of almost every election. And man, you just wanted the Conservative side to win and get something done. But when I got there, I realized, you can't handle everything. There's just too many issues. So I got involved in things I had sort of background, interest, and expertise. And there was two basic areas that I took on. One was energy policy, and one was Canada-US relations. And I got involved in energy and natural resource stuff because I was a geophysicist. Okay, even though I'd done mining, not oil and gas, I still knew the industry lingo. I had connections. I did stuff like that. And my number one thing was to try to get good policy. So I would organize talks by people on how to develop Canada's energy industry. And I remember when we were in opposition, guys who later on would become cabinets would show up. No lobbying, no special interest stuff, just how can we do good stuff? Remember Jim Prentice sitting beside me as we listened to guys describe about options for pipelines. We were trying to figure out, even when we were in opposition, how we could get these things done. Small scale nuclear reactors, are they possible or are they a pipe dream? Ways of developing the oil sands. We did a tour up there to figure out, what sort of things like we could do. Stuff that, people didn't hear of, but we were trying to do stuff to develop our mining and oil and gas industry and get good policy in there from day one. So that got me involved there. And then that tied into Canada-US issues. I got elected to our executive of working with the Americans. Largely because, again, agriculture, trade, and energy are really important to Saskatchewan. And that began to get me introduced to American politicians and going down to the States to work there. Because, we have three major countries that are important to Canada: the United States, and the United States, for defense, for trade, for everything. That's all we do. And you needed to get to know the Americans and be able to work with them. So that's what I really started to emphasize on, because our pork, our beef, our oil, our potash, that's what Saskatchewan's about. And that starts to get one, engaged in having to know all about the US politics and getting things done like that. So yeah, getting involved from the Canadian side and learning the American players and political actors was one of the things that I did to try to look out there for my constituency. So.
And we turn now to the question of leadership in the Conservative Party. We come to the end of the 2015 election. Stephen Harper has fought a valiant fight. The further I get away from that government, the more questions I have about some of the political decisions that were made. But, I mean, whatever. No one's perfect. And as he put it himself, as you just mentioned, he never felt like he had the political capital to do some of the things he wanted to do. And I don't know if that's a stay or go situation. Do you just jump into it and see what happens, or do you just hope that happens next time? I don't know. We can debate that another time. But nonetheless, Stephen Harper fights, I believe, 87 days was that election, longest period in Canadian history. And he comes to the end of it, and he still doesn't win. And that essentially that evening, or shortly afterwards, he resigns as leader of the party, and therefore Rona Ambrose becomes interim leader, and the great race begins. We are now at, with 15, 17, and now 20. We've had three leaders in 5 years, plus interim leaders. Are we just in a deficit of leadership? And what was your experience as you attempted to try and show that there was a place for a principled prairie conservative at the helm of the Conservative Party of Canada?
Yeah, I think I'll start with answering your question. Did we have a deficit of leadership? Again, I like a lot of what Stephen Harper did. I'm proud of a lot of things we did when we were in government. But I think one of the issues we had in our last term was people were being exhausted, and Stephen wasn't trying to grow new people for leadership. He wasn't looking forward for the party beyond his time. We had people like Jim Flaherty, who literally dropped dead on the job just about. And we had some other people who'd been there for a long time, and they were just burning out, and they were getting too exhausted. And we can debate this, and I don't want to put certain names on it. Ottawa had slowly changed people, not totally, but partially. And I'll let people fill in what and who they think that might apply to. But, some really outstanding people had been not totally, but partially changed by Ottawa, and we were exhausted. And that, I think, was one of the things. Stephen had sort of assumed there would be people who could naturally step up. And I think in retrospect, he would have tried to, maybe groom 2 or 3 or 4 successors who could get in there. So if that happens, we're after the election, it's April afterwards, and I get some people who come into my office and try to pitch me to be leadership candidate. And my first response is, nope, no way, not even close. My French is horrible. I love my riding. I know what the travel's like. It's absolutely ridiculous. I don't want anything to do with it, not in a million years. End of story. So they asked me who I should go pick, who I should go talk to. I gave them some names, including some of the people who did run. I said, look, everyone's got their faults. You will know them and so forth. So at that point, not even thinking about it. Then with the Vancouver Convention coming up, there was other issues coming up. And there were things being done in the background by the leadership of the party to influence things without letting the membership just totally organically and democratically respond. And that began to get under my skin. Mm-hmm. And that caused me to start to respond. I remember a phone call with Rona Ambrose, our then interim leader, complaining about, rules had been bent to get things done at party convention. And her blunt response was to me, well, certain ex-cabinet ministers had signed off on it. What are your real concern? And I was like, well, that doesn't matter. It's the membership thing. So going into convention, I was already a little bit irritated. I phoned one of the other guys in the leadership race to check if he'd heard about it, because I wasn't planning on running, but I knew he was. He was totally blindsided by it, and he didn't know what he was going to do. In the end, he did a good job in the leadership race, but decided not to try to fight the establishment, but press it. So that had begun to get me irritated in that games were being played. If the membership chose an issue, not a problem. Then at the convention, things happened there, and I accidentally let it slip on TV. I'm sort of fed up about stuff. I'm willing to run for leadership. And that, as they say, caused the phone to start ringing, and I started to get involved. And I had no clue what I was doing, none whatsoever. I'd never done major fundraising. I'd never laid the groundwork for anything. I had no ambitions to lead the party. And here, after letting it slip on TV, I was having people call, offering to set up my campaign and get me going. And it was, I was going to run as a conservative's conservative. And wherever I finished, that's where the chips were going to be. I had some good friends running in the race, guys I respected, and guys I hoped would do well too, because I didn't disagree with everyone else I was running in the race. Some I did, some I didn't. But what really got me going in the end was the sort of tricks and stuff that were done at the convention. Just 1 second here.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
No problem.
Okay, go ahead. I've just got my daughters coming in the room here. I thought the door was locked, but that's okay. She's leaving. Go ahead.
It's not a problem at all.
Yep.
We're this is a family-friendly show. I think that something that kind of comes to mind is that your objections to the party are very similar to my own. This is a place where I've heard more than enough stories of, and people brag about it actually, their influence inside of the Conservative Party, inside of the upper echelons, as apparatchiks of the party, and how they've made MPs suffer, even cabinet ministers suffer, how they shape who will be in leadership and who won't, how they rule nomination races. I've heard people brag about this stuff, and quite frankly, it disgusts me. So I must agree with you that would have been the kind of thing that would have gotten my gander up as well. And I would have said something probably as well on a program not unlike this one, where I would have been like, no, you know what, damn it, I'm done, I'm angry, and I'm gonna fight the good fight. And I can appreciate that's where things started for you. So I mean, the leadership race goes on, it continues. I don't know the details of the pre-COVID world of leadership races. I guess you guys toured around a little bit and did some of your debates a little bit in other places. Of course, you gave lots of interviews, you campaigned, you compile your volunteers and your supporters, do your best to reach out to people. Finally, we get to the convention, the actual leadership convention, and at one point, I believe that you were actually leading in the balloting. Was that a bit of a surprise?
best I ever did was third place in the balloting. Bernier and Scheer were 1-2 all the way. I bounced between 3 and 4, and Aaron O'Toole just slipped past me on the final ballot where I got eliminated. So yeah, depending on the ballot, most of the time I was fourth, but I did slip into third. And yeah, I mean, the thing is, I guess for me, I had never planned to do this. Bernier, and to a lesser extent, much lesser extent, Andrew Scheer had been thinking about this for a longer time ahead of time. A couple of the other guys had been thinking about it a bit. But yeah, it had been sort of, last minute. And I really don't know a lot of rich people. So my fundraising, I had no clue. I hate asking people for money. I just sort of went out there because I figured, you know what? I'm going to go do a stand. I even had a hard time asking colleagues for support, because here's one thing to know about all MPs. They all want to back a winner. And I realistically, as much as I was going to try hard to win, I couldn't see a way I could win. So why would I put pressure on guys who would then back a loser, and their careers would probably suffer if they backed me? So I even felt guilty about asking guys who I should have asked for support for it. My viewpoint was, you know what, I'm going to do what I think is right, and where the chips lie. And in the end, the national press had sort of picked me to finish 12th in a field of 14, and I finished a pretty decent fourth.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, that was, I have a bit of an inside scoop of what went on at that leadership convention. And I know people that were on the floor. I know people that were working for you at the time who were on the floor. And some of them were treated quite, we'll just say that they weren't invited to all the nicest things. And they weren't, and people weren't happy about a conservative daring to try and take the throne of the Conservative Party of Canada, because apparently we're not really conservatives. And when you did finish in the place you did, especially when you crested third there briefly, but definitely finishing fourth out of in the top quarter of the leadership candidates, that surprised people, shocked people, scandalized some people, and it gave a lot of hope though to those of us who are conservatives of faith, of family, farms and firearms for that matter, and other things as well. Occasionally fiscal conservatism. It encouraged us, and it gave us a lot of inspiration that the party still had to hear and listen and heal to that element within its membership. What happened after that evening?
Well, after that, I continued to go work in my constituency and plug along on that. I wasn't put in any front bench position or anything like that. And, I still, in the next campaign, went out there and worked for candidates in the party. I still encouraged people to run. I still got invited, but, and I tried to help the party as much as I can in that election. But, I wasn't really, how shall we say, invited to be a major participant in the 2019 election campaign.
And that's where things kind of start to break down. And for those of us who are socially conservative, we do believe that there is kind of a natural bias within the party against us. I feel that certain people within the gun community also feel that way. Well, in a sense, conservatives feel that way. So if you're an actual true blue conservative, maybe even a populist conservative, a hardware store conservative, it doesn't matter which way you want to describe that. Somebody really does think like, no, I want to discuss the questions around abortion and federal issues there. I want to talk about gun licensing, or whether or not that even has an effect at all on who is ever harmed by gun crime. I want to have real discussions about this. I want to talk about euthanasia. I want to talk about fiscal responsibility. I want to talk about canceling the CBC or defunding it, or like making sure that all that funding is available for local media as well as it is for the federal media. That real questions around innovating the country. I want to talk about pipelines. It sounds like more and more the party has decided that it's going to try and imitate what the liberals are doing when it comes to clientelism and woke ideology or political correctness or symbology or apologies, and not the really hard and fast stuff that built this country. This country was built on a rail line. It's built by a somewhat drunk man who decided that he wanted a country to fight Mackenzie with over in the form of Canada. That's what Canada was built on. And now it seems like Canada can't get things done, and like conservatives aren't helping get things done anymore. as we get back to that question into the 2019 race, the riding boundaries were changed. You had a nomination battle. What was kind of your thoughts as you came out of that?
You know what? I always stood for what I stood for, and I was never, how shall we put this? I've never been regretful of where I've stood. And that's the thing. I've always tried to figure out, back to the point I had earlier about how to get in. How can I be both a good communicator and be someone who stands with good principle? So for me, the question has always been, how do I have the biggest and greatest impact? Because the things you recited there, all those issues, I agree on all those. That's all those things I care about. And frankly, there's more. But I know in the Conservative Party, there's people who pull one way and people who pull the other way. But my view has always been, even if I lose, I'm going to get up off the mat and go in there and engage again. Because again, some of the people who are arguing against me are not people who disagree with my policy. They're making the pitch again to try to get the Liberal vote in Eastern Canada. I politely disagree with them, and I'll try to bring them on side rather than fight with them. So here's the thing. I get in there and I will fight and dig around and do what I can to pull those people back to my side. And then one of the, this was either a retired MLA or an MP, one of the guys who phoned me the other day said, all of our membership are more right-wing than when they're in public. I mean, the things Andrew Scheer said to me about a whole range of issues, considerably more right-wing than when he ran as party leader in 2019. Very much more right-wing. He sounds a lot more like me in private than he does like himself in public. And this is the thing. Rather than backing away, try to bring those people back so that they say the same things in public, but they do in private. We want to work together. And I think rather than fighting with them, I'm going to try to show that I can be successful and that I can bring more people like myself in rather than driving them out. That tends to be the approach that I'm trying to take in all of this.
I think that's a very mature approach. It's something I could probably learn from myself. I'm not going to correct that at all or say like, oh no, I got to figure it out. I do. I mean, I've had this debate with actually my own beloved at one point and a few other people. The problem is that pretty stern words, upside the head, as it were, did put me back on a course correction a couple of times. Things that needed to be changed about myself that I don't know if it would have gotten through to me any other way. But I appreciate what you're saying there, and I do think it's mostly true, particularly in the more therapeutic time we live in. At the same time, I also would not challenge yourself, but challenge the conservative movement more broadly with the issue that I would like to see some intelligent strategy around any of this stuff, where it just doesn't seem like they'll even dip their toe in. And I mean, even intelligent strategy when it comes to electoral politics. I have no idea why there's a single orange riding outside of a city in west of Lakehead. Nikki Ashton's riding comes to mind. Churchill can be a pretty conservative place if you get to the right people. And on it goes. The territories shouldn't be any other color than blue. There's a West Coastern riding here in BC that shouldn't be any other color than blue either. So it's the thing is, like, there's lots of other places where it could still be blue. And I want to know why we don't have a smarter kind of electoral strategy of like, no, really, when we try to defeat the Liberals, we're only going to fight for 5 or 10 seats in Toronto. We're not fighting for 50. We could take more ridings elsewhere and bring it to the point where, no, Laurentian Canada is the bastion for them, sure, but it is a very tight one. And we are at their doors, and we only need a few people to defect to finally break their hold and have a sense of not a perpetual majority, but a majority that they can't easily take back. Whereas the one that we have right now just doesn't quite come to fruition in the same way.
Well, let me give you my answer. And this is just observational. I don't have any professional thing, but this is just my observation. Most political advice tends to be a version of this. Do more of what appeals to me, and then you will get elected. So the question then is, who are the me's who tend to run political campaigns, not just for the Conservatives, but provincial, federal parties, etc.? Tend to be often people with liberal arts degrees, often even if they grew up in a rural area, they're living in an urban area now. And even if they don't mean to, that's who they become more culturally comfortable with. As I pointed out to someone, you look at the House of Commons, and again, this is not a criticism, this is an observation. You have way more lawyers and university professors than almost any other profession. Okay, I don't think we have a single truck driver in the House of Commons. Okay, that is the most popular profession for men in the country. Okay, we've got a car mechanic in the House of Commons. I think that's a good thing. So what you have is you have the upper middle class white collar types dominate overwhelmingly politics. Okay, they come from a certain percentage, and not because they're bad people or anything, but they just naturally reflect their own culture and their own worldviews. And they forget areas like you mentioned, the Northwest Territories, Northern BC, etc. People often don't come from that background. They work in mining industries, geophysics like I did, farming. So you get some of those guys in rural areas, and therefore there's no strategic pitch made to those people. And going back to what I told you about Saskatchewan earlier, Saskatchewan wasn't a socialist province, it was an agrarian populist province. But upper middle class, white collar people in North America are generally not populist. They tend to lose that at university if they get degrees in arts and things like that. That bleeds away. Not everyone. It's not because they're bad people, it's just a sort of a natural process. So instead of actually sitting there and realizing, you know what, some guy in a pickup truck who works in logging in northern BC isn't going to think or care what we care about, they tend to reflect their own little world. The smart political operatives, and my encouragement to the Conservative Party leadership, get a lot more guys who haven't actually gone to university to start running some of your campaigns. Guys who grew up running, winning, working in areas and haven't gone downtown Toronto in their life, because it changes you. Doesn't matter who you are or where you come from, the longer you hang around in certain areas, the more you lose touch with where you come from. And I think that's a problem the political left has had. They have it way worse than we do, which is why places like Saskatchewan have completely abandoned them, because they have zero interest in the working class, blue collar, small businessman sort of population. But I think it's a temptation that, again, I don't think this is deliberate, conservative parties that overly professionalize their advisors can get into too. So you don't get bad people deciding we're going to ignore Northern Ontario. It's just they forget because they don't have as much interaction as they used to. I find it interesting. You know, you look at Mike Harris. Can you guys hear me? My screen's frozen.
No, we can hear you.
Okay, good stuff. You look at Mike Harris. The guy came from Northern Ontario. You look at Ralph Klein. He didn't have a university degree. They really connected with people who weren't sort of the downtown elites when they were at their best and their most popular. And, you know, Donald Trump, he had no political experience. I think, oddly enough, that helped him and that freed him from constraints that people like me, who have worked way too many campaigns, sometimes bring. We keep thinking things over too much instead of just speaking from the heart. And that authenticity goes well with people because people can see that you really care for them. You're not just spieling out a line that you think they want to hear.
And with that, let's turn now to your current quest for representation again, that you would like to represent the people of, let's see if I can do this one more time, Moose Jaw, Lanigan, Lake Center. For some reason in Canada, we're obsessed with names that are long and convoluted, almost as bad as Bob Zimmer's writing, actually, but not quite. But nonetheless, here we are. You're seeking the nomination again and hoping to represent people in this district. What are the things that you're kind of riding on? What's the campaign looking like? What's the platform you're trying to put forward as we quite possibly head into a federal election this fall?
Yeah, I'm basically telling people I want to beat the Liberals and I want to bring back, you know, core conservative stuff. It's interesting. I've had pitches from people in the Buffalo Party, the Libertarian Party, Christian Heritage, Peoples. They all want me to come over and join them and run for their party. But I said, look, I want to accomplish something because I can change both the Conservative Party in directions that are good, and I can change the country without changing myself. So my thing I'm telling people, and this is what I'm hearing, I say, look, you know me, I'm always going to try to be a principled, solid guy, but I'm going to do everything on planet Earth to beat Justin Trudeau. If I win the nomination, I will try to help out guys across the country. If it looks like my riding's going solidly conservative, which frankly this one should, Moose Jaw Lake Center Lanigan. But that's the thing. Our membership really want to beat the Liberals because, man, they can't take much more of this guy. It's driving them nuts. They're not getting any progress. People have so many ideas about how to build the economy. In our riding, we're getting slowed up on things like irrigation. Talking to a guy who's got a plan, and this seems fairly interesting, to build a pipeline up through Port Nelson Churchill in the Manitoba region. So we don't have to deal with the Americans, we don't have to deal with Vancouver, and we can still build a pipeline. So this is the thing. We've got so much energy, and people want someone who will get up there and fight the Liberals. They're always saying, hey guys, I know the news is pandemic, 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 COVID, 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 but I want to hear more from you guys. It's so good to hear from you and hear that you're fighting. I fill them in on some of the stuff that some of the good MPs are really doing in Ottawa. And they're like, hey, I didn't know about that. Like, it wasn't on my social media. And that's the reason I want to get in there, because we need some energy. We need some zip. And I really want to hear the words, Justin Trudeau resigns as Prime Minister due to electoral defeat. I can't wait till I hear those words someday.
Yeah, God willing, there soon. It's been a trying time, put it politely. As we kind of round out the hour here, Brad, maybe you can tell us a little bit more about your vision for the party itself. Here we are. We're kind of in between things right now. It's been a few years since Stephen Harper was leader. What of his legacy would you take with you? What would you like to see change inside the party? What does the party need to do, not just to win this upcoming election, but to become the de facto ruling party of Canada, but just definitely understood to be always a strong contender on the stage that does shape the direction of this country?
I think the one thing that I would really want to encourage my fellow Conservatives, and when I talk to Erin O'Toole, this is one of the things I push, is try to reach out to people who are not our traditional demographic, but who share our values. You hit this quite directly when you talked about northern BC and parts of the north and the rural areas. One of the things in my leadership race, this people don't know unless they actually looked at the data, visible minority ridings, new Canadian ridings, I was by far the front-running candidate. Better than Andrew, better than Max. Those areas, I actually did better. And this is one thing I've really realized. A lot of people look at our immigration and they see people who want to come into Canada, change our values, change our country, change our language. And, I know some immigrants like that, but I know a lot of new Canadians who they come here and they don't want to change Canada. They want the Canada they read about, one where it's more free enterprise. They're a little bit taken back about the socialism. A good example, this is from the States, a North Korean defector at Columbia University. She said, yeah, the university where I went, Columbia, they try to brainwash you as much as the North Koreans do. A lot of our new Canadians, they want to be free. They came here for freedom. They love things like the whole idea of the crown, the identity, the constitutional law. They want their kids to speak good English. Interestingly enough, they're more likely to go to Christian churches than native-born Canadians. They want our culture. They want our religion. They want to become Canadian. They want to have maple leafs tattooed on the inside of their heart. But you know what? They often vote Liberal. I remember running into a fundamentalist Baptist pastor who told me he always voted Liberal. Why in the world? Nothing about him. But he was Haitian, and no one had ever reached out to him. And it's the same thing. Working class voters, again, we don't have a single truck driver in the House of Commons. How ridiculous, okay? Truck drivers are the most important occupation, biggest one for men across the country. So this is the message I've got to the Conservative leadership. We need to bring in people like that who are overlooked because they want to participate, but because they don't have those sort of job skills that naturally push them toward media, toward government, we miss them. New Canadians are often scooped up by the Liberals, even though they don't share their values, and they share ours. And working class voters, they're often treated as pawns to help move the beautiful people, and I use those terms in really broad quotes, get elected. We need to go out there and build that coalition. Again, Ralph Klein, the guy never had a university degree. He screwed up and made mistakes. People loved him because he was authentic. And we need to get more of those authentic Canadians to stand up and vote for us because their values are our values. But when their union leader says go vote NDP, or the people who help them with immigration say go vote Liberal, we don't get them. So that's my message to the Conservative leadership. There are a lot more voters out there than you think. There's a lot more people out there who share our values. Go out there and let's fight for them because they actually don't support this crazy Justin Trudeau guy. I mean, if you came from a socialist country and you want to come into free enterprise-ish Canada, do you really think you like the way Justin Trudeau wants to monitor you on the internet, micromanage your business, and tell your kids what to think in school? I don't think so.
Mm-hmm. No, I think that's very well said, Brad. It's very well said. Thank you so much for joining us today, and we hope to have you again soon.
It was good to be here. Sorry about the technical screw-ups.
Brad, can you hear me?
I can't hear you. I've lost you.
It's not a problem at all. Not a problem at all. But thank you so much, and we'll see you again soon.
Okay.
Okay, that's on me.
I got you back. Have a good one.
Thank you. Of course, I was speaking with Brad Trost, that is the former member of Parliament, and of course, former leadership contender inside of the Conservative Party. He went on to, of course, now seek the Conservative nomination for, let's see if I get this right, Moose Jaw, Lanigan, Lake Center, or Lake Center Lanigan, one or the other. In any case, do find him online at bradtrost.ca, and do, if you want to support him, take out a membership and help Brad Trost take his nomination and get to where he needs to go, which is Ottawa, to help us be better represented throughout Canada as true blue Conservatives. As we kind of round out the hour here and finish up the show, I just, of course, the pipeline comes on in a few minutes, so I want to get out of their way. But the last thing I'd like to note here is, again, there's a way forward when it comes to Canadian leadership. And there's a way forward in this country. But we're not going to get there without some very hard work. And I think we talked about a bit of that today. If you look through the comments today, there's some controversial points made, but it all comes down to the same thing, which is this country is in need of some serious renovation. And again, that's whether we're the sovereigntist wing or we're not, or people are soft federalists or situational sovereigntists. The point is that whatever you want your neighborhood to improve, you want your town to improve, and you want your life to improve, and you want your children to live in a better place than you did. That's not the reality of what's happening in this country right now. And we need to be honest about that. And so whether that would happen, whether it requires breaking everything down into, neighborhood by neighborhood when it comes to our political organizing, or it means keeping the borders externally the same, but rearranging them internally here in Canada, however that needs to happen, we need to be honest about it and be honest about what that means. So let's discuss that. Let's be real about it, and let's pray about it at a certain level, because honestly, it's a big task. It's a really big task, but we can get there if we all work together. So I am going to figure out how to get out of here with the proper branding and everything else. We are going to see you bright and early tomorrow, 9 a.m. Pacific, 10 a.m. Mountain. And I'm just so thankful for your guys' attention throughout this programming. We'll see you bright and early tomorrow,